As you heard here first, Connecticut commenced the 2025 legislative year with a fire hose of anti-local zoning legislative proposals. And each month of the session you have been kept abreast by CT 169, strong about which bills have withered and which have progressed. This continued on May 12th of 2025 with another in the CT 169 Strong series of webinars, moderated by CT 169, Strong President and co-founder and Fairfield Planning and Zoning Commissioner Alexis Harrison. With panelists, CT 169 Strong co-founder and New Canaan Board of Finance and Affordable Housing Committee member Maria Weingarten. CT 169 Strong member, environmental attorney and Fairfield Planning and Zoning Commissioner Catherine Braun. And Camerata Government Affairs and CT 169 Strong's lobbyist Julie Camerata. As the 2025 session enters its final days and decisions must be made, they peer into their crystal ball to see what mischief looms in Hartford and what House Speaker Jason Rojas and his supermajority in both houses have up their sleeve.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Alexis Harrison. I am one of the co-founders of CT 169 Strong. We're the only grassroots, all-volunteer organization in Connecticut that is fighting for your local zoning rights. As always, it's been another busy session in the legislature. We have about a month to go before the adjournment, and there's still a lot to happen. Just to bring you up to speed, I'm sure many of you have been following our newsletters, but we expect at some point this week or perhaps next week that the legislator will probably bring forth a big omnibus housing bill. I think it's been called an aircraft carrier of bills that will be focused on housing and zoning. It's been a priority of House Leader Jason Rojas to bring a kind of a top-down approach with proposals that override our local zoning, public health, and safety codes. We have not seen the draft language of the bill, which is HB 5002. It's not been made public yet, but we anticipate a lot of concerning concepts to be in there, such as the fair share housing concept, which we've been talking about for a few years now, that would essentially mandate towns to build affordable housing, their fair share. In some cases, it could be up to thousands of units. I know in my town, Fairfield, we would be mandated to build, I think, over 2,000 units. Other concepts would to get rid of minimum parking standards. Minimum lot size couldn't exceed 1 acre. So this is the kind of concepts that we're seeing in Hartford that will be thrown into a gigantic bill as early as next week. So tonight we want to focus on the legislation and hear from Maria Weingarten, co-founder of CT 169 Strong, as well as a member of the Board of Finance in New Canaan and the Affordable Housing Committee. Catherine Braun, a longtime environmental lawyer who serves with me on the Fairfield Town Plan and Zoning Commission, was a firsthand view of how these kind of concepts would impact a local municipality. So I will turn it over to these ladies. We also have, Julie Camerata, who is a lobbyist for many years in Hartford, a lawyer, and has been working side by side with CT 169 Strong for the past 4 years. So ladies, a lot to talk about. Maria, I'm going to start with you. I highlighted some of the concepts that we're going to see in this so-called aircraft carrier of a bill. Do you want to just go into them, especially talk about fair share and some of the other concepts we're seeing?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So, really concerning that fair share, which we have not seen. We've gotten a report, a study report, but we haven't seen the language of what they're trying to do with that study. So that study gave 3 different versions of what your total allocation of fair share might be, and that means your fair share of affordable that your municipality would be responsible for. And I think the key thing that we've done is, as we've done in the past, where we've saying, well, what does this mean for a municipality, right? So I'll just take the first one on the list. We're looking at Andover. Andover's got 1,324 housing units per the 2020 census. And they have 57 affordable units. per the 830G report. Now, what does that mean? So then what are the units that they would have to come up with to create? Well, version 1 says they'd have to build 2,260 units. Another version says they'd have to build 1,289 units. So there are so many different versions of I'm sorry, 702 units. Another version says 302 units. So if you have 1,300 units and you have to build 302 affordable units, that's about 23% of your total housing stock, just in the affordable units that you'd be required to build. And so what they're saying is you may not, that's the units they want to see built in your community. It doesn't mean that your municipality has to build it. It just means you have to create an opportunity to build it. How do you create an opportunity? You'd have to provide zoning that would allow a developer to build such density that maybe those 300 units are only 10% of a project or only 20% of a project, and it has to pencil out. So you're talking about huge, doubling or tripling of your housing stock in any town. And I know this is complex and hard to really digest, but that is literally what they're saying. And that's just one example of a small town. So I think we have to be really cautious with any of these versions because none of them are truly workable. None of them ever considered whether you have your septic or whether you have sewers, whether you have public water accessible to have density development, whether your roads can sustain, whether your schools, none of that's considered. So this is a bad bill. And it hasn't yet, the way the original Fair Share Phase 1 said was it should be brought up to the legislators and they need to vote to approve the units. We haven't even gotten there yet. It hasn't been presented to the legislators. So the fact that they're trying to throw this into an aircraft carrier bill without it being, listened to on its own makes no sense because this is a big concept. It's a huge change. It could be a really severe burden on all residents because if you were lacking of the infrastructure, then your property taxes would have to cover the cost to expand all those services. And again, how does that bring you any more affordability? It really doesn't. So that's just fair share. Alexis mentioned the 1 acre lot. So no municipality in Connecticut can have any lot that's greater than 1 acre size. We know that that doesn't work for farms. It doesn't work for any areas with wetlands where you would have to have enough space where you could get septic to work because we have so much of our state that does not have town water, town sewer. So it's problematic. Another bill is the no minimum parking required. This has been an issue up in Bridgeport, and if you've read our recent newsletter, you would know that Bridgeport has come out and said 17 of their 19 council members came out and said this bill does not work for us. And they implemented it as a city during the height of COVID during 2021. It got passed through with all of their other reg changes. And it's wreaking havoc on Bridgeport as a city. And if Bridgeport as a city doesn't feel like Bridgeport as a city needs cars, their residents need cars. They need to be able to get to work to, maybe their work, they're a nurse and they work late nights and they need to be able to get home and they want to be able to park at their building. This law now would say that no local P&Z can require minimum a certain amount of parking in any project that's coming forward. And that's development. That does not say just residential. That says residential, commercial, anything. You can't require anything. And they're just going to leave it up to the developers to decide whether they want to provide parking at all. And so actually, we've even seen Bob Duff come out against this. Senator Duff came out and he said that he did not agree with the idea that he did not feel that we should be giving out a handout like this to developers, that subsidizing parking is just a handout to developers. So we agree with that. So we were glad to see that he said that, but this is concerning because this bill may come up in the House and it is in that bill.
Marie, I do
And
want to stop you. I mean, have any of our legislators been talking about this? I always say this. I get the newsletter from my 3 state reps, and I never hear about basically we want to take away local control of zoning, which I think is precious to many of us.
I would say the short answer is no. I think that a lot, because again, this is a process that has changed over time, right? It used to be that a bill you would be totally formulated before it would leave a committee. And it would get fully discussed at a committee, and people would be able to provide comment on bills prior to it leaving the committee. Now we don't even see what the bill language is right now. And we're talking about a bill that may be called as soon as tomorrow or the next day. And I think they're just trying to figure out how many votes they have in the majority to pass these onerous concepts in this aircraft carrier bill. And so again, this is not good policy. If Bridgeport's, city council members came out and said this is not good for them, how is it good for any other municipality where you don't have public transit, where you don't have, and it's true of all of Connecticut. All of Connecticut lacks true public mass transit. We are not New York City. We are not Boston. We don't have endpoint to endpoint service. We don't have frequent enough service that's available on weekends, at night. And so these are the issues that have to be dealt with thoughtfully and locally. So removing all parking makes no sense from so many different perspectives. It impacts the quality of life for the residents there, and they've talked about their elderly having issues, about families with children. All of those things are impacted when you don't require on-site off-street parking on development projects, and it just causes congestion, and you're taking out the main tool that P&Zs have to make sure that your roads are properly managed and your parking is properly managed, and that's the main tool. So if you take that out, it's a problem. So that's that bill. So then we've talked about fair share in the parking, and then 1 acre. They're also talking about temporary shelters at churches. That's also in that bill. Again, these are sheds, sheds that do not have running water or any sort of toilets or anything like that. And they can have up to 8 units as of right, is the bill as it is currently written. Again, we have not seen the new language yet because it's not being shared with us. This is concerning as well. I think a recent study, I was just looking it up before our meeting started, but they're saying that sexual offenders are the ones who make up a huge majority of the homeless. So this again raises concerns about not knowing, or who are we putting into these facilities and into churches, and are all of these communities set up to handle the wraparound services that are needed when you're trying to address a homeless issue. So that's part of it. They're also requiring cooling shelters in all municipalities for homeless. And then the last thing is, as of right, commercial development on any commercial can be converted as of right to residential. Which again, when you're saying about if you add it in with the no minimum parking requirement, and one of the comments that Rojas has made, it's been shared with us that Rojas has sent a letter back to the Bridgeport council members, and he said that they have other tools that they can use to consider what the parking should be, or and the reality is, if you've created as of right development, there's no P&Z engagement on an as of right development. So it's a hollow offer that this is going to actually help residents to make sure that the projects are properly parked, because they won't be.
Thanks, Maria. I know there's probably more to discuss, other concepts that we will definitely touch on. But I think that's a good area to stop at with Julie and move to her, because Julie, you've been in Hartford for many, many years. I don't know if you've ever seen anything quite like this, where people who represent us in Hartford really want to remove the essence of our local community, such as zoning and other rights that we have always cherished. So to give us your thoughts.
So I'm relatively new to the P&D area working on this issue, but on local planning and zoning issues and housing issues. But I will say that it seems more and more that that there's a push of kind of a narrative that almost creates kind of confusion and urgency. And so we end up making a lot of decisions that may not be the best decisions in the long run. And I see this as being one of those areas where we're seeing kind of there's an emergency, so we have to push, push, push. And the other thing with this is the consolidation of decision making in Hartford. So I can't say whether I've really seen it. That wouldn't be fair, but I've seen it in other areas now where I hadn't seen it before. So I do have those concerns about it. And I also have concerns about the fact that, we don't, basically the majority, if they push, they can pass the bill. So, we need to do the best we can to try to negotiate the points on here that are very difficult. And one of those things that I'm very concerned about is that it seems like this is almost the fourth year, I think, of this bill, if not more. Normally, we wouldn't see initiatives that were kind of defeated without better terms than that were defeated for 3 years in a row, come back again. So I am very concerned about this year because it does seem that the rhetoric is at a high, and that the pressure's at a high. And now there's some consolidation effort, plus all the bills that were out there. So we saw housing and planning and development and even other committees pass the same bill. That's disturbing because that just means you want to have a lot of vehicles available. And so that normally implies that you're not going to get the vetting that you need. So a lot of things have me very concerned about this session over previous ones. It seems the dialogue may be coming to an end, and that's concerning.
Thank you. Thanks, Julie. And we'll come back to you. Catherine Braun, you're here. Good to see you. One thing, a concept I did want to touch on was basically the eradication of one of our most important, I think, laws that we have, one of our Environmental Protection Act. And that's been on the front burner, I would say, of the Environment Committee, ironically, in Hartford. Can you tell the audience tonight what that would do?
Sure. One of the bills that's pending is to change the Connecticut Environmental Protection Act, also known as CEPA, that allows anybody in the state of Connecticut to file an environmental intervention into any type of proceeding or court action, meaning your zoning commission, your conservation commission, any commission. And then once you do that, you can present evidence, testimony, experts to establish that there is environmental harm that would result from the project. So the bill that's pending would eviscerate that by making you have to be an abutting neighbor of the project or an established established nonprofit organization, both of which would have a severe negative impact on the ability of people to file these interventions. That law was passed in 1971 when all the environmental laws were passed. And this would basically reverse, 54 years of state law and eviscerate it. And what's equally disturbing is it's the Environment Committee that put this change forth. And it was the Environment Committee that sponsored the original Environmental Protection Act that many years ago. It's hard to believe that our Environment Committee would be proposing an act that would eviscerate its own iconic bill that was passed that protects the environment for all of us. The environment is for all of us, not just an abutting neighbor. If you have a problem with your neighbor's nuisance, flooding issue, whatever they're doing, you can sue them. That's not what the environmental acts are for. They're supposed to remedy decades of development that did not properly address environmental concerns. So that's a big concern, and I don't understand why it's pending. There's also, you had mentioned as of right conversions and things like that. Anything as of right also prevents, I believe, the ability to file an intervention, because it prevents the ability to have individual site-specific review by the zoning commission. It's just rubber stamped at the front office, at the zoning department. You'll never know about it. No one will be able to write letters, speak. There'll be no site-specific, project-specific review where you address concerns related to stormwater runoff going into the tidal wetland or anything like that. And finally, when you're the 1 acre minimum, towns such as Easton, where over 70% of their land is watershed land, they rely on their zoning regs to allow larger lot sizes to protect our drinking water supplies. So all these bills, they're so focused on development, they're completely ignoring and avoiding pretty much most environmental issues that will protect us in the future. It's a big problem.
Thank you. I do want to touch on about the demand for housing. We hear over the years, we've heard that Connecticut is in a housing crisis, that we're in need of 90,000, 100,000 units. And somehow, and I'm curious, where does that come from? I mean, I drive around Fairfield County a lot. I live in this area of the state, and I see development happening everywhere. In fact, in Fairfield, where I live, we have 1,000 approved apartments that have not even been built yet, approved, yet not built. So things are happening. So I'm just curious, where is that housing crisis mantra coming from? And is it true?
So it's just, well, they've picked a, how do I describe this? They picked a reporting mechanism that's done by the Census Bureau, and it looks at housing cost burden. And so they're saying that anyone who's spending more than 30% of their income, annual income, on housing costs is cost burdened. And so their assumption, and this is where it falls apart, their assumption is if their housing cost burden, the way to solve that problem is to build the amount of houses that there are people who are cost burdened. If someone's having a difficulty paying for their used car, you don't go give them a new car to have make payments on. That's even more expensive, which we know right now, development is very high. The costs are really high. We've had some tariff issues recently. We've had, labor costs have been accelerating, lumber costs have been up. So there are all these different factors, but even more so is interest rates. So mortgages have been high. The cost for financing any of these projects has gone up. It's from where it's been historically low. We've been in that artificially historically low phase, and where a lot of people bought homes, and they're not looking to move right now. So they don't want to trade up from their 2%, 3% mortgage into a 6%. So you've got stuck inventory. And so there's this feeling that there isn't enough housing right now. And we're coming off of COVID, right? So we didn't have much development during COVID. We're coming off of 2008, where we had a financial crisis, where we had the Great Recession. And then we had a real downturn in our markets in Connecticut, where we had 2 years prior to COVID, we had 2 years excess housing inventory in Connecticut, which was quickly absorbed. And during that time, there was very little new development happening, because prices were declining. So it wasn't as good, it wasn't as profitable. So there's the issue here is, you're using this methodology, this housing cost burden number, to say that's how many homes we need, but that's not the real need. That's not how many homeless are in Connecticut. Our population has been stagnant or just very minimal growth, and most of that has been concentrated in areas that are near Metro New York area. So there's been minimal growth in our state. Their household growth has gone up a little bit, but that's gone up mainly because the size of our households has declined. So you're having a little bit of a mismatch as well in terms of how big a property or how big a home people want, because the households are smaller than they used to be, again, probably because it's expensive. So, and then the last part I'll add is that housing costs are calculated not just on what your house costs. It also includes your energy costs. It also includes your property taxes. It also includes your insurance costs. So if you add in all of those factors, which are very high in Connecticut, those tend to make our cost burden numbers higher than they otherwise should be. So only looking at zoning to fix this, and only looking at mandating development everywhere by eliminating sensible process and procedures, planning and zoning process that happens everywhere, makes no sense. Can you guys hear me?
No, now I can.
Oh, sorry.
Nope,
Can you
that's me. That's me.
Okay.
After 5 years, I don't remember to put mute off. In any case, there's some questions about who's behind all these bills. You know, some folks think that perhaps that developers are funding these ideas. I mean, who knows? But can you, because they seem to really help developers maybe just plow through zoning a little easier. So can one of you answer that?
Well, there are definitely developer interests here. So we are seeing the Desegregate Connecticut's of the world, the Open Communities Alliance. So Desegregate Connecticut is, as we've said many times, a program of Regional Plan Association. So they have a number of large developers on their board. They're focused on city, municipal, right around the closer tri-state area, focused heavily on New Jersey and New York, and I would say maybe Connecticut is like the stepchild that they're. So I think that there is an effort there to try to push a lot of these policies that are very city planner directed toward our areas of our state, and not the entire state, just really Lower Fairfield County and the northwest corner of Connecticut. Is the only area that Regional Plan Association cares about. So is that really good policy for Connecticut? You know, not necessarily. You know, is that going to solve the problems? Not really. So then the question is, how do we address this? How do we move forward and make better policy? I think it's not by following what the developer advocates want. And the developer advocates are sometimes a little bit lazy, it seems too, because they just take national policies and they say, let's just implement them here. And that might not be the situation that, or the concerns that we're facing here in Connecticut.
Yeah. I think we have a question from Tim. Tim has a question about what does CT 169 Strong recommend to address the housing issues in Connecticut?
Sure. Well, there are a number of policies that have been put out. We just look at what policies are put forth. We don't get in the business of creating our own bills, but we do get behind good ideas. Things like how can we reduce the labor cost or increase the amount of construction labor that's within our state. So any sort of programs that might help that are good opportunities. How do we encourage first-time home buyer ownership? Rather than just looking at developing rentals all the time? How do we, so there's a list of over 20 some bills. I will put it in the chat after this, but there's a whole bunch of bills that we actually can get behind. And there's, so those are the main ones that we're focused on because they are pro-growth, pro-responsible growth. And so that's what we encourage everyone to take advantage of, is to try to encourage your legislators to push out good policy, not these developer advocate bills that really only don't improve affordability. They really don't increase the amount of affordable housing, and they're just developer handouts.
Yeah, and CT 169 Strong, we work with folks from all parties and to put forth common sense policies. You know, we're not up there writing bills, but we're there to support good policies and really shed sunshine on bills that are just not going to work for our communities. So that's really our focus, just to clarify that.
And quite
Also-
frankly, one more thing is we're out there, as you mentioned before, Alexis, we're there to tell people what's actually in the bills, because really they're not. The legislators are not putting out what's in these bills. They're not on the committees. They don't necessarily know all of the bills that are out there yet. And they have not been following them because they're busy tracking their own legislation and bills in their committees that they're assigned to. But really, there are some incredibly onerous bills this session. And it's shocking when people are starting to hear about them. They're really surprised. And most of them, we know that this aircraft carrier bill is being proposed by the majority leader in the House, Rojas. So that we can say is that he is meeting with lots of different groups, mostly the developer advocates, the different organizations that are like-minded and agree with him. but he's really not meeting with everyone. I know, they're meeting with CCM as well, and CCM sent out an email today with concerns regarding the same bills that
Who's
we.
CCM? Can you just tell folks if they don't know what CCM is?
Sure. Connecticut Council of Municipalities represents 168 of Connecticut's 169 cities and towns. And so they have they have lobbyists, and they have their governmental group, and they've come out and sent an email blast out to residents, to actually to their members, to make sure that they get engaged right now and let their legislators know. So all of their leadership within all of these municipalities, to let them know that there's a lot of bad bills that they need to have addressed and to stop.
One of the other points I wanted to make is, there's a general overarching theme with this, and it's affordability. There's no doubt whatsoever that the opportunities for young people here are much more difficult. They're smaller. They're definitely much more difficult. So there's a lot going into that. It's not just housing stock and whether there's housing stock. I might say, as a young person, if the prices of houses are going up and the interest rate is going up and my salary is going down, or my security and my salary is going down, those pressures, I think, are common sense, obvious ones that impact the availability and the affordability of housing. You cannot, you can't separate the housing market when you start from your high electric bills, from increasing property taxes, from increasing costs of healthcare and all the other things that go along with it. So when we talk about common sense, we're not just looking at that. You have to recognize the real pressure bearing down on young people. And to me, it's just not, I don't understand why every generation needs to settle for less than the previous one. And I'm leaving the next generation a lot less opportunity. And to me, that's one of the overarching issues here.
Yeah, thank you. And then I know we have some more questions percolating. I did want to ask a question about 830G. I actually got a call this weekend from one of my constituents who took note of all the development happening in Fairfield and all the 830Gs that we have on the in the hopper right now. And she just wanted to understand it more. And she's like, it's really not creating a lot more affordability in Fairfield. Why is this law still here? Why is that not being addressed? Kathy, do you want to take that since you've been studying it for so long? You're on mute.
My understanding, and somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, is that none of the bills are addressing 830G. 830G basically is kind of an onerous bill that was passed 35 years ago with a good goal of expanding affordable housing by letting developers pick where the market wants it. And to do so, they basically said no zoning regulations could be used in any 8-30G application. So height, setback, coverage, parking, density, your town's regulations cannot be used. They are completely avoided. And in exchange for getting that sort of free ride through zoning, the developers have to dedicate 30% of the units of whatever they're building as affordable. So that causes the developers to be incentivized to build high and out, as high as they can and as close to the property line as they can. And the buildings are way out of scale to the neighborhoods they're put in. To make it worse, if you deny it, if the zoning board denies it and it goes up on appeal, the burden of proof flips from the applicant that's appealing it to the town to justify it. So that gives another incentive to the zoning commission to approve bad projects that they know will cause harm just because the neighbors didn't have the money to hire an expert to explain the harm in the record. So that's the problem with 830G. All these bills that are pending don't address it. Now, obviously, if fair share is passed and they force your town to go up to 20%, you'll be exempt because the law exempts any town that already has 10% of their housing stock as affordable. But that's a very painful solution. Fairfield has about 3%. We just got a moratorium, which is a 4-year temporary reprieve from 8-30G. That was a hard road getting there. But I would not want to count on, I would not want to pass fair share for all the reasons Maria mentioned. And to get to even 10%, my a public official in our town that's responsible for monitoring it and affordable housing said, we'll never get there. There's about 83% of all the towns in the state that have never had 10%. They've never been exempt and they never will be, just because of idiosyncrasies of how the ratio is calculated. So why all the bills don't address it, a politician would have to answer that. But what I can say is your state legislator should be representing their geographic area, not any other agenda or policy coming from any direction. Land is not partisan. Land use should not be partisan. And bills that are proposed that affect your neighborhood, that allow people to build anything they want, wherever they want, however they want, and tie the hands of your zoning board, not acceptable. Every single legislature should be looking out for their local community, and that's all they should be looking out for.
I would agree with that, and I would add that no minimum parking requirement to me is most detrimental to the cities. And actually the fact that Bridgeport has come out and said this is not working for us, and to me this is an opportunity where like they just passed a 74 unit project of mostly studio 1 bedrooms, and it's no parking on site whatsoever. And to me, it's because Bridgeport has that over 10%. They can't do necessarily that out of scale development as easily. And so here, this is their way to get cities in on this too and have out of scale development happening in cities, just like it's happening through 830G in the towns that don't have the 10%.
That's very interesting. Yeah, because Bridgeport, for example, is exempt. It has had 10% all along, because
Right.
historically, you could explain it better than me. They put the affordable housing where the people lived that needed it, and the towns didn't get it. But so Bridgeport is not subject to 830G, but they would be subject to this parking ban, I guess.
Yes.
Correct. And the other
Right.
thing I'd mention is that, you mentioned as of right again.
Mhm.
And the one thing about 830Gs, there is a little bit of 830G in the legislation. And basically what it's doing is allowing as of right 830Gs. In the church bill, they allow as of right 830Gs that you can build a for affordable housing. You could do that as of right. And in the desegregate bill as well, anybody who wanted to sign on to do that bill, it currently has a number of onerous as of right provisions that do allow, so the 830G to be developed as of right in a TOD. And again, that's like, already your 830Gs have such limited options for review, as you mentioned, Kathy. So it's like, it's only health and safety reviews. And so it's very limited as to how you can counter something if there is a concern. And so to now make it as of right, it just puts 830G even more on steroids than it already is.
Yeah, another question that we have, and I think this is a great point. A lot of these bills are density bills. They would call for more apartments in our suburbs. And what happens, creating generational wealth happens one way, buying a home. So this gentleman has a question. Connecticut has CHFA for first-time home buyers. Why isn't this not pushed more?
It has been pushed in the past, and it's also been tailored to try to, for periods of time, and I think used quite effectively. It's something that I've raised a lot because it's connected to employment. It can be connected to particular cities where you're trying to increase the property owning working class population. I think it's a fantastic point. I guess one of the obvious responses to that would be because you can only fund that and so many other things. And so when we're going down this road, it's one of the other difficult spots we find ourselves in. It's additional pressure from the state, because a lot of these things they can do to tie your hands, but don't necessarily touch the coffers of the state. That's another thing that makes these particular bills so difficult. Whereas when you have something as effective as it can be with CHFA, which I think is the right kind of development, although too small in my view, I think, it competes for resources, whereas when you're tightening down on the towns, it's not competing for monetary resources.
And the other
Yeah.
thing I would add is Chaffa, those loans are recognized under 830G. And when I did an analysis, it's on our website, you can take a look at it. When I did an analysis on the variance between last year and this year, it was noted that a lot of towns had more Chaffa loans that were taken. And that's just a factor of a homeowner deciding to use a Chaffa loan. Now, why would they do that? They would do that because they would have a lower down payment or even no down payment potentially. And we know that housing prices have gone up. So that's really closed a lot of people out of the market. So those Chaffa loans allowed more people to access a mortgage that they otherwise couldn't have been able to under the normal mortgage process. In addition, I think the fact that the rates have gone up has made them more competitive as well. So I think that all of these factors and again, it's a benefit that certain communities can avail themselves of. Now, there are certain towns that because of the income level, you get maxed out, and because of the property cost, the property values, you are maxed out. So there are a number of communities in Connecticut, as the pricing has gone up, that have been priced out of this market. So Lower Fairfield County, for the most part, cannot avail itself of many of the towns can't avail itself of those Chaffa loans, unfortunately.
Yeah. I know Barry Michelson, who is the head of the Stamford Neighborhood Association, has a question. Just in the interest of time, just keep it as succinct as possible and ask the question, and probably just less statements if you don't mind. Thank you. Go ahead, Barry.
Okay, I'd like Maria just to explain a little bit more about the encampments allowed. And I'm just going to make one recommendation. I think we have to attack this at a very base level to get people really angry. And we really ought to build on this issue, exactly what he's trying to do. And Maria skipped it. They were talking about body of function. I forget the
That's
language.
right.
And
There's one more bill. Yeah.
They're looking to do
Very.
something very nasty. But go ahead.
So there's also one more bill. It's the homeless can perform life activities on public lands, and they cannot be removed, or their possessions cannot be removed. And any person or municipality that would do so would be fined if they did so. The only way you can remove them is if you move them to a on-site within your municipality shelter. So to me, this reads as a mandate on all municipalities in our state to provide homeless shelters. And it also, when we're talking about life activities, this could be your park, and people are living on the ball fields in the middle of a park or wherever else. Yeah, they did add schools, that they can't be at a school property, which was something that I brought up in my testimony. I hadn't heard anyone mention that as a concern. And again, these are concerns, because we have, again, that recent study came out and said that a very high percentage of the ones are sexual predators, or sexual, they are. So it's concerning that we might be putting our communities at risk by creating these environments. And we want to make sure that we give all the services that are needed for the homeless. And homeless also have a number of different reasons why these things happen. It could be a chronic condition, but there's very little of that in Connecticut. We are actually 50th in the country in chronic homelessness. So we think that this might have a lot more to do with the fact that we're a sanctuary state, and we're trying to find ways to push mandates on municipalities when potentially the federal government may not be giving as much resources to our state in the, in the current environment.
Maria, are these lifeline? Is there a definition of what they mean by that in the legislation?
I'd have to look, honestly, I think they were changing language the last I heard. So I would hesitate to, originally it was all kinds of things that they could do, but then they started limiting things based on, like, you can't be cooking like with an open fire or things like that. But yeah, so there are some limitations based on what the discussion was as the bill was being discussed, but it's just concerning. It just sort of is a breakdown of, it's giving rights that other residents, other people within the community don't have.
Thank you. Thanks, Barry.
Makes no sense. You want to provide services, you want to provide help where you can, but you need to have the right facilities, you need to have the right infrastructure to support all of that as well. And not every community is situated and has the funding and the resources to do those things, or has them available within their community.
Right. So, another viewer has asked about, well, what do the votes look like? Who will be voting for this bill? And essentially, what does the head count look like? Do we even know at this point, given we haven't even seen the bill yet? We have just heard about concepts.
I mean, you.
Sorry, I think I froze for a second.
Yeah, I think I froze for a second.
Okay, in any case, what does the head count look like? Who will be, I mean, I assume if they bring forth a bill, the majority party probably has the vote, so how does it work? And maybe Julie is best to answer
Yeah,
that.
so we don't have a firm vote count yet, but we generally have a vote count of who will vote and who is having more difficulty based on where they live. And some of that now is in flux because we don't have a bill. So it's hard to have a vote count until I know what's actually in the bill and this gets to be a certain change. I would say there's enough to, if there's enough concern, it can be stopped or not pulled or not put on the floor, called for a vote. But again, before we know what's in it, it's hard for me to do that. I will say that it's generally speaking the more moderate members, so that come across the Weathersfields, the Glastonburys, and then some of the towns in the eastern part of the state where they really have real concerns with this particular bill. But it could be anywhere. Suffice it to say, it can be stopped if it's too extreme. So that's why we really need to continue to talk about these bills and be alert for when they come out, because it isn't a hopeless endeavor at this point. It is far from there being a full consensus on the bill that's going to move forward yet.
And I would add that there's a great deal of pressure coming from leadership as well to try to push things through regardless. And we are hearing things like, you know, cities that were looking for certain funding, unrelated, completely unrelated to parking, are now, you know, for education, are now being, you know, questioned on, oh, you want that, but you signed this letter. Saying that you don't, you know, you don't want parking to change statewide. And other cities as well are having pressure put on them to make sure they stay in line. So it's sad to say, but that's sort of what happens when there's such an imbalance, when you've got you have a super majority up there, which is what we know. So it's really hard to, you know, and when you're not seeing what a bill is, how do you put up a defense against a bill when you don't even know what's in, you know, what the actual language says? You hope that they're going to reason and be able to put normal, rational things that are beneficial for all of our municipalities. That's what we all hope for. But the reality is that that's not what we're hearing about. You know, we're hearing about the worst aspects of it that are just still on the table, and we just don't understand. If a bill, if 17 of 19 Democrats in Bridgeport said on the city council said this bill doesn't work for Bridgeport. If it's not working for Bridgeport, why are we pushing it statewide? Wouldn't that be like a game changer? Wouldn't that be a stopper right there and say, okay, let's move on to something that's better? Why are we not listening and hearing what residents are saying? Because, you know, we all want to have progress in Connecticut. We want better, we want the community to thrive, our communities to thrive and to flourish. And again, there's got to be better policies put forth, and we should work on those instead of creating these, you know, zero-sum game conflicts between, you know, and trying to set, you know, towns against municipalities, against cities and rural communities. And it doesn't work. We can all come together and work together to get for a better Connecticut, and that's what we should be doing.
Yeah, well said. I would also add, what we've seen in Hartford for the past 4 or 5 years that we've been doing this as CT 169 strong, is that they often put good things in bills like this, in an omnibus bill, things that you may want for your community, that's maybe that's important to, a certain constituency. And they do that on purpose to get the votes. So, we often hear, legislators say, well, I had to vote for it because there were good things in it. And it's kind of, I would say that gives legislators cover. A lot of these concepts should rise or fall on their own merits, minimum parking requirements, fair share. They should all go to the floor individually, quite frankly, not push into one big aircraft carrier of a bill. That's just, do no harm is your first mantra as a state rep, and that, and I don't see that happening. So we will continue. Catherine, the environment and zoning, they seem to go hand in hand. They're all, together in some shape or form. And I know when we talk at our zoning meetings, we often talk about the environment, about tidal wetlands. And can you just talk about how important the environmental care is missing from all these bills?
Yeah, there's, like I said before, why the Environment Committee would put forth an anti-environment bill is beyond me. It's ridiculous. But your TPZ, your zoning commission actually is kind of an environmental protection agency at the local level. Your conservation or wetlands agency, they're confined only to wetlands or inland wetlands and inland watercourses, meaning fresh water. Anything affecting tidal wetlands, it's your zoning board that regulates that. The DEP regulates things if you're digging in the water in the wetland, but if you're doing a big development on the coast that could drain dirty stormwater into the tidal wetland, that's your local zoning board's responsibility. So don't think of zoning as not being environmental, because it is environmental. The other thing zoning does is it preserves open space and historic resources. A lot of these bills completely ignore that. They might have carve outs on some of these bills for, they might say as of right development in the transit area, meaning no public hearings, no this, no that, build whatever you want, wherever you want. We'll carve out wetlands. Fine. Wetlands is already protected under another law, but open space is not. Okay. And even in towns like Easton, watershed land that's within the first 2 classes near a reservoir, that is protected from development, but not class 3. So there's a lot of land that could be built on. And we need to preserve that for a whole variety of reasons. I mean, the more development you have, the more impervious surfaces, which means the faster the water runs out and the more of the pollution is that flows faster in the wrong direction. It does not get absorbed. And natural biofiltration does not take place when you pave things over. And open space helps preserve the ability of our earth to sort of heal itself, to cleanse the water before it ends up in a reservoir or Long Island Sound. So your zoning commission needs to be cognizant of that. And I don't think people think of it that way. We need more natural open space. We need it especially in areas that are densely populated. We also need it in areas that provide our water supply. Open space not only helps cleanse the water, helps trees, they clean the air pollution. Also, they're huge carbon sinks. They absorb carbon monoxide, okay, which helps us with climate change. Tidal wetlands help provide flood control in a natural manner. And the tidal wetlands, which are on most of our coastal communities, are under threat from development pressure and from sea level rise. As the sea level rises, it kind of destroys the level of salinity you need. So the tidal wetlands literally drown. They need to migrate onto the land. But as we develop down to the land, my town just approved a development that has construction activity within 15 feet of a tidal wetland. Whereas all of the research and the biologists say you need 100 feet. So all this is happening. And once you lose open space and the natural sort of ecological services it provides, it's gone forever. So any bill that, first of all, prevents local decision-making by your zoning board to be able to review something, to have a public hearing, to allow interventions, to make conditions of approval, to help improve things, that's going to hurt the environment. Any bill that has as-of-right development without allowing you to carve out what we might want to do with open space preservation. My town requires 10% of any development of 10 units or more to be preserved as open space. I don't think that's enough. I think we need more. Also, in the future, I feel that we're going to need to have larger wetlands buffers. Most towns have about 100-foot buffer, but they can build within it. Many towns allow development well within that buffer. So I think in the future, we need bigger buffers around wetlands, watercourses, the coastal area. We're not going to be able to do that as we build over on it, and we're going to lose all the services. I haven't even talked about wildlife yet. That is also requires open space. So
Thanks, Catherine. I have another question from the audience. Please explain what is meant by an aircraft carrier of a bill.
It's an omnibus bill. So essentially what we have is HB 5002, where we're hearing that might be the bill. And what it is a bill that started as a dummy bill, had something nice like that was reasonable. It was a study on homelessness put into it. It was maybe only 2 or 3 pages, maybe not even that long of a bill. And then I think what we've seen happen is that a lot of the language the rest of the language is not put up until the morning the bill is called. So legislators from the House, legislators from the Senate, whichever one it's being raised in, they're not going to see the language that's in the bill until it's called. And they're going to say that there is substitute language. Sometimes they do a strike all where they'll take out what's already existing entirely and put something totally new into it. It could be 5 pages, it could be 10, it could be 50, could be 100. And we just don't know. What we've heard is that sometimes legislators from the minority party, because again, they've not seen it, they've not been in discussion, because these are bills coming out of the House leadership or the Senate leadership, and that's Democrats. So they probably haven't seen much of the language. Maybe they've heard about the concept, but they haven't had a chance to read the bill. So one of the legislators from the minority party will start asking questions, not having seen the bill or knowing totally what it does, and then just start talking the bill. Meanwhile, other legislators who are in the minority party and elsewhere, anyone else will then start reading what's actually in the bill because nobody's seen the bill. And so that's what we're talking about, an omnibus bill that has many different concepts. And I think that's like the imagery is, it's not our imagery, it's what we've heard the bill called. So we wouldn't call it that, we'd call it a Trojan horse. We called it a Trojan horse. We've called them Frankenstein bills because they're all kind of parts put together. But they call them an aircraft carrier bill, I guess, because there's a lot of little planes that can land on them. And they all get to go together and get called for a vote. So I think that's the imagery.
Yeah, and I think the only other thing I would add is that the one thing that's known about an aircraft carrier bill is that there's going to be some good and some bad. And that's how they end up getting the votes they have. Instead of arguing this is good for everybody, they say, well, everybody's going to hurt a little. And that's how they'll try to sell it. So the other thing, but one other thing is about an aircraft carrier bill is it's very risky because one of those little planes could just be enough to blow the whole thing up. So it's not the best way to make laws, but they also, just to be fair, there's a good and there's a bad to using that approach.
And
Yeah,
I would say
I would add, sorry.
Colorado used to have the same issues, and they have created new laws that they can no longer do that any individual concept has to be raised and voted on its own. And that I think it's, we're starting to see the most extreme version of aircraft carrier bills or omnibus bills happening lately. And it seems like every time we're watching the session, it seems like there's a lot of last minute language that's not been really vetted. Definitely not vetted by the public in a public hearing. Definitely not vetted well by both parties. And a lot of times, unfortunately, the majority leadership will just lean heavy and say, just, trust us. Trust us, and they're not reading the bills. They don't know what's in the bill. So we encourage everybody to read the bills. And
I would also, I just want to add quickly that in 2023, Fair Share, this highly controversial bill that really didn't have much support, was actually passed in the wee hours of the morning, hidden into a conservation bill. So that's the kind of games that are being played because it's entirely dysfunctional because they're kind of giving their members cover, I would say, again. So I would just remind people, read the bills, make sure your legislators are reading the bills. Kathy, I think I cut you off.
I was going to just say the devil's in the details. And I remember last year when the Work, Live, Ride bill was up and there was a claim verbally on the floor that you didn't, you would be deprioritized from funding if you didn't opt in. So it wasn't a true voluntary bill. But on the floor, they said, well, you'd be grandfathered in if you already have a transit district. And so you wouldn't be deprioritized. I mean, but it wasn't in the bill. And the bill was horribly complex in the language. You had to read it 5 times. So you have to read the bill very closely, and there's no time. These things come in the last night, they get voted on hours after people see it for the first time. So convoluted language that refers to 5 other sections that people claim protects you from the impact of the bill might not be so.
Yeah.
True. And I think that that's where we are a little bit vindicated on this because we've said that there is no grandfathering. The original version that was heard last year didn't have grandfathering written. So maybe that was a handshake agreement somehow, but that wasn't what the language said. And even the new language now, the way the desegregate bill reads as it is out in the public, basically says if you had a TOD, you can apply to be exempted from those onerous as of right mandates that we talked about earlier, the 830G as of right, the up to 9 units as of right. That's still not saying that what was said last year, that if you like your zoning, you can keep it as long as you vote for this. So I mean, that's what a grandfather would have been or should have been. I would have imagined, but that's not what was actually in the bill. So, and so they changed this language, they tweaked it a little bit in this year so far from what we've seen. But again, it's still not a true grandfathering. You still have to have someone sign off on that and make sure the OPM still has to approve you to not have those as of right mandates. It's not a given. So let's just be clear on that. Any legislators in those communities that have TODs should know that.
Yeah. Thank you. I know that it's 8 o'clock and I do want to ask you ladies, what can people do? I hear from people, I'm so frustrated, I don't even know where to begin. This is a very complex topic. So, tell people, what can they do?
Well, you can get in touch with your legislators. So on our website, if you go to ct169strong.org, we have a petition that really briefly, it's very hard to get it into limited words, but we have it's about 10, 15 lines, and you can put your name, put your town, and it'll populate with your legislators in your email server, hopefully. And then it has the petition draft language already. We encourage you to make it your own. If there are some you do or don't agree with, change it. You can. It's an email. You're able to change it however you'd like. And so we encourage you to do so. Now we know we're having a little bit of issue with some people. I think some people have pop-up blockers potentially. So there could be on your search engine at the top where you would do your Google search or whatever, there's usually a little icon that you can click on to sometimes disable your pop-up blocker, and then it should pop up your email. If not, there is also on the page, you can find your legislators through the CBIA list. They have all your legislators, and you can just cut and paste the body of the language that's on our website and just put it into the email body, and then just find your legislators on that thing on the CBIA website, which is the Connecticut Business Industry Association, and you can find them, and then you can just send your email that way. It's really important to get in touch with your legislators. We suggest you also call them. If you know them personally, text them, email them. They need to know that these are bad bills, and the ones that are bad and that shouldn't move forward. And there are those good bills that, again, are on our website as well. And we encourage you to talk to them and see if we can get some good things passed. And those are the main things. And also share this information with your neighbors, your friends, your family, anybody who lives in Connecticut that you know. Did you know that they're trying to pass 1 acre zoning everywhere in the state? Did you know that they're trying to pass no minimum parking required on any developments statewide? This doesn't exist anywhere in the country. And we're going to be the early adopters. I don't think so. This is not a good policy. So
Right.
those are the
But
suggestions.
I would, there's another question from the audience. Can any of these bills be overridden? I think his example is some towns are exempt from 830G, like many of the cities. I forget the number that are exempt from 830G, but I guess what he's saying, is there any language where people could maybe not, or towns not opt into this?
It
You
depends
can,
whether the bill allows it, but
Yeah,
some of the bills limit by a population of 20,000, but that can change at the last minute too, where they make it for everybody. I hesitate to say that anybody's off the hook on any of these things. Yes. So that's a concern. Yeah. We have to wait and see, I guess, is what is really, and again, this is where they're hiding the ball. You don't know until you see what's actually in the bills. The desegregate bill is an opt-in currently as it's written, but again, I know there's new language on that as well that we haven't seen. But that bill is an opt-in, but if you don't opt in, you won't get funding the way for steep grants and any of these other grants. So it's really a Sophie's choice. It's except that OPM will decide all your local zoning, and it's going to be onerous. Or the other alternative is then you just won't get any funding for steep or other city grants, or if you don't opt in.
thank you. All right, before we close, anything else? Julie, Maria, Catherine, you want to add?
well, I'll say we end at midnight on June 4th. That's usually, so yeah, at 12:01 on the 5th, you could take a deep sigh of relief for what hasn't passed if you can figure that out. Hopefully I'll have it figured out by then. So this isn't going on forever, but the next few weeks are really going to count.
Absolutely. And I will make a plea for some donations if you feel so inclined. We take any amount, everything helps. And we are all volunteers. We are not taking any money ourselves, but we do pay Julie Camerata, a fairly modest salary to help us up in Hartford to speak to the legislators, and she's extremely valuable. So if you're for local control, please support us. And you can go to our website, CT169 Strong, to donate, or you can use the handy scan on Maria's background there.
And yeah, CT169strong.org. So
Excuse me, .org. I apologize. Thank you. So
There's
we'll be,
also a Facebook page.
yes.
and our Facebook page. And I would say follow us, because as this stuff gets tighter and we get closer, it's going to be last minute when a bill is called. So we are going to have to post things on social media last minute, on Twitter, on Facebook, to try to tell people to get engaged. And we encourage you to make those phone calls, because those are the things that really are going to matter. It really is going to come down to the public being aware of what's happening. And as you know, the media is really not doing a good job of telling everybody about all these bad bills. And neither are the legislators. So we're here, we're trying to do that. So if you fund us, it gives us more money so that we can let the rest of the state know, everybody else who's not on this call or not going to be able to not know about us. We just met our friends in Bridgeport, who were like, where have you been? And we were happy to make, new alliances with others. And they're like, this is great what you're doing. So we want to spread the word far and wide within Connecticut. And we can only do that if we have the funding resources to do so. And we are not like the desegregates and the whomever who are getting millions of dollars, or all these other nonprofits who get tons of money every year to
Right.
literally lobby against all of us, lobby against our municipalities, lobby against our towns, our residents. We're here for us, because we are us. We are our local leaders in our communities. We care deeply, and that's why we do what we do for no money.
Oh my, yeah. So we will be continuing the conversation online on Facebook, and certainly we will at least have a few more of these webinars. And thank you very much for your attention, and we'll continue that conversation. Have a good night, everybody.
CT 169 Strong is an all-volunteer grassroots organization. There is no paid staff, no expensive executives, no fancy offices. 100% of all contributions are used to pay out-of-pocket expenses, like web and email services, advertising, and professional lobbying, boots on the ground in Hartford. Without hundreds of supporters, much of what CT 169 Strong does would not be possible. Since 2020, CT 169 Strong has been the unifying voice of Connecticut's 169 towns. Standing against a barrage of anti-zoning proposals from well-funded developer-fueled nonprofits. If CT 169 Strong had been around in 1989, 8-30G might have been stopped before becoming the scourge of neighborhoods and communities across Connecticut. Now is the time to stop work, live, ride, and fair share legislation. Once that genie is out of the bottle, it will do irreparable damage and be impossible to put back in the bottle. To stay abreast of the never-ending march of anti-zoning proposals in Hartford, to know how and when to let your voice be heard, go to ct169strong.org. Please note the red button in the upper right-hand corner for a link to the donations page. Every dollar goes directly to saving neighborhoods from Hartford overreach. Thank you.